Okay, let's unpack this.
Hmm.
We are embarking on a deep dive today into, well, one of the most foundational documents in military planning, the strategic estimate.
Mm.
This isn't just some basic briefing, right? It is the critical analytical tool. It really sets the entire stage for a combatant commander to apply operational art.
That's the perfect framing for it. We're looking specifically at the framework used for strategic analysis within the context of the United States Indo-Pacific Command's area of responsibility.
Right.
Our mission here, based on the material in the advance sheet, is to understand how planners translate that high-level national strategy into, theater-specific objectives and actionable planning considerations, and for the most complex region on Earth, really.
I sort of see the strategic estimate as this essential intellectual bridge. It's like the analytical prerequisite that catalyzes all the further staffing before a plan even gets near senior leadership. So if this document is so vital, what are the key intellectual requirements? What defines a really high-quality estimate? The advanced sheet gives us a list. I think it's 6 standards.
Yeah, 6 standards. And these really enforce analytical rigor, prevent that kind of tunnel vision. They make sure the analysis looks beyond just the immediate military objectives and connects back to policy.
Okay.
So first, the estimate must accurately identify United States and, multinational policy goals and objectives. That's number 1.
Goals first. Got it.
Second, it has to identify the desired political and military end states for the region.
Sure.
And that distinction can often be, quite subtle.
Right. And the third standard, that one really captures just the immense scope of the assessment, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It requires explaining the strategic environment itself.
Mm-hmm.
So methodically breaking down political, military, economic factors, and critically appraising the forces of specific interests of all the actors involved, friendly, adversarial, and neutral too.
Precisely. That holistic view is just non-negotiable. The remaining standards then make sure the analysis is looking forward, it's comprehensive, and it integrates the highest risks.
Okay, so what are those?
So fourth, the estimate must explain the major strategic and operational threats and challenges facing the command. We'll definitely get into more detail on that later.
And number 5 is key, I think, because it brings in this constant special area of emphasis, which is just an enduring reality in this theater.
Right.
Nuclear capabilities. The estimate requires a thorough examination of the nuclear capabilities and posture of states within the region, or, acting upon the region.
Absolutely essential. You just cannot plan effectively in the Indo-Pacific without that specialized focus. It has to be there.
Right.
And finally, the 6th standard, it requires deduction. Planners have to go beyond just reporting facts. They need to actively deduce potential opportunities and also the risks the combatant command might face while trying to protect and further United States interests in that region. So these 6 points, they're really the required inputs for a high-quality estimate. They demand both synthesis, pulling it all together, and foresight, looking ahead.
That structure makes a lot of sense. It forces the military planners to think like diplomats and economists before they think like warfighters.
It absolutely has to. Because military action is, at the end of the day, simply one instrument of national power.
Right. Okay, moving forward then. None of this planning happens in a vacuum, obviously.
Yeah.
It all flows from a pretty clear hierarchy of strategic guidance, this concept of nested strategy.
Mm-hmm.
This makes sure that military action, even way down at the tactical level, actually supports the highest national goals.
Yeah.
So where does this chain begin?
It begins right at the top naturally. The hierarchy is really emphasized in the Joint Planning Doctrine publication. It notes that everything stems from the national security strategy. This is the big document outlining the major national security concerns of the current administration and how the nation plans to address them using all the instruments of national power, diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. The whole toolkit.
But the national security strategy, it's often purposely broad, isn't it? Very high level.
It is.
That's where the Department of Defense has to step in and sort of translate those national goals into actual military imperatives.
Exactly right. And that's the role of the National Defense Strategy of the United States 2022. It outlines the Department of Defense's specific approach for implementing that national security strategy.
Okay.
This is the document that really sets the strategic bedrock for the Joint Force. It establishes 4 absolutely critical top-level defense priorities.
Okay, let's lay those out.
Yeah.
Because they basically define the scope of every single operation, right?
They do. Number 1, defend the homeland. That's always the fundamental priority. 2, deter strategic attacks against the United States, our allies, and our partners. 3, deter aggression, and importantly, be prepared to prevail in conflict when necessary.
Right.
And number 4, build a resilient joint force and defense ecosystem to make sure we have future military advantage. Those 4 priorities really dictate resource allocation and strategic focus.
Okay. And building on those priorities, we then get the National Military Strategy 2022, which is titled Strategic Discipline. What essential amplifying guidance does this provide for the joint force?
So the National Military Strategy, this comes from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It provides the military framework for prioritizing, planning, allocating resources, and managing risk across the entire Department of Defense.
Got it.
It represents the chairman's best military advice to the Secretary of Defense and the President. It serves as the definitive starting point for all the subsequent Joint Strategic Planning System actions. It really operationalizes those 4 priorities from the National Defense Strategy.
So once the ends, the objectives we want to achieve, are defined by these strategies, the Department of Defense then has to figure out the ways to achieve them.
Correct.
The National Defense Strategy advances its priorities through 3 key mechanisms: integrated deterrence, campaigning, and building enduring advantages.
Let's start with integrated deterrence. What does that really mean?
Yeah, integrated deterrence is, it's much more than just having superior firepower. It's really a strategic mindset. It's tailored to reduce competitors' perceptions of the net benefits of aggression relative to restraint.
Oh.
The National Defense Strategy describes it as working seamlessly across everything: warfighting domains, theaters, the spectrum of conflict, all instruments of United States national power, and the entire network of alliances and partnerships. Yeah. It's about integration.
So if an adversary is thinking about aggression, they shouldn't just be calculating the cost of, say, a bombing campaign. Yeah. They should be calculating the cost of sanctions, global diplomatic isolation, cyber disruption, maybe a unified response from a dozen nations all at once. Precisely. That's the idea. If they only calculate the cost of our missiles, we've actually already failed to fully apply integrated deterrence. The goal is to make the potential response so comprehensive, so coordinated, and so certain that the benefit of aggression is always outweighed by that collective integrated cost.
Okay, that makes sense. That brings us to the second key mechanism then: campaigning. This feels like where the strategy shifts from maybe theoretical deterrence to actual day-to-day action, especially in that tricky gray zone.
Yeah. Campaigning is defined in the National Military Strategy as how the Department of Defense sequences its day-to-day defense initiatives and develops advantageous conditions. The aim is to deter conflict, accomplish strategic objectives, and prevail against adversaries.
Okay.
And this is distinct from, say, contingency planning for a major war. Campaigning focuses on building advantage and managing competition across the entire spectrum of conflict, including that gray zone you mentioned.
Can you give us maybe a functional example?
Sure.
What does day-to-day defense initiatives actually mean in the context of campaigning, say, in the Indo-Pacific?
Sure, it's the constant sequencing of actions that shape the environment, but crucially without crossing the threshold of armed conflict.
Right.
So this includes things like routine freedom of navigation operations, regular joint military exercises with key partners like the Republic of Korea and Japan, rotational troop deployments, maybe infrastructure investments in allied nations, conducting sophisticated joint cyber training. These actions develop advantageous conditions over time, they improve interoperability with our allies, and they raise the bar for any adversary attempting to gain regional dominance. It's very proactive, continuous shaping.
Understanding that shaping mechanism, that really brings us to a core distinction, doesn't it?
Gotcha.
The distinction between the art forms that make the strategic estimate relevant, strategic art versus operational art. They support each other, but they operate at fundamentally different levels of leadership.
That distinction is laid out pretty thoroughly in the Joint Planning Doctrine publication. Strategic art is the highest level. It's focused on the formulation, coordination, and application of ends, ways, and means to implement national policy and promote national interests.
Okay.
It's sort of the coherent narrative that bridges the present situation to the desired future global status.
So if the National Defense Strategy sets the objective to deter aggression, that's strategic art defining the end.
Exactly.
Operational art then figures out the actual physical means to make that deterrence real on the ground, or at sea or in the air.
Precisely. Operational art is the cognitive approach used by commanders and their staffs to develop campaigns and operations. It requires skill, knowledge, experience, creativity, judgment, all of that to organize and employ military forces effectively. And crucially, operational art aids the joint force by linking the tactical employment of forces, the physical movements and actions, to those overarching strategic objectives. Strategic art gives the policy context. Operational art demonstrates the feasibility and the efficacy of that strategy through concrete planning.
That separation seems paramount. Okay, now that we understand the strategic foundations, that strategic focus naturally turns our attention to the landscape itself. Section 3 and the highly complex threat hierarchy in the United States Indo-Pacific Command Area of Responsibility.
Yeah, Admiral Samuel Paparo, the commander of United States Indo-Pacific Command, describes a very clear threat hierarchy. It starts with what they call the pacing challenge, the People's Republic of China.
Yeah.
China's comprehensive military modernization presents the most significant and, frankly, evolving challenge to regional stability.
And Admiral Paparo's statement, it highlights some very specific and, pretty dangerous developments. We're talking about massive investments in advanced systems here.
We certainly are. China is rapidly advancing its development of sophisticated missile systems, space and counterspace capabilities, hypersonic weapons, and, critically, a growing nuclear arsenal. The statement makes it really clear that China's military expansion, especially in the Western Pacific, is fundamentally destabilizing the region.
And the most immediate, maybe the most provocative strategic challenge centers on Taiwan. The statement uses very strong language, describing Beijing's aggressive maneuvers around Taiwan not just as routine exercises, but as, quote, dress rehearsals for forced unification.
Yeah, and the complexity for the strategic estimate here is just immense. The advance sheet specifies, that the United States doesn't recognize Taiwan as a country, yet we rely on the Taiwan Relations Act for security matters.
Right, that ambiguity.
Exactly. It creates a situation where the diplomatic stance is legally restrained, while the military threat is escalating almost daily. So the estimate has to navigate that legal ambiguity while addressing the very real operational threat.
So, while China is the long-term pacing challenge, the National Defense Strategy reminds us that we also face an acute threat from Russia.
That's right. Russia is still considered an acute threat. Even though it's geographically focused elsewhere right now, it poses serious, continuing risks globally.
Like what specifically?
Well, these risks include things like long-range cruise missile threats and extensive gray zone campaigns using cyber and information operations. The National Defense Strategy also points out that the increasing breadth of the relationship between the People's Republic of China and Russia creates global dilemmas for the joint force, requiring coordinated responses.
Okay. And then beyond the major powers, we also have to contend with persistent threats that demand continuous vigilance, specifically thinking about North Korea and Iran.
Absolutely. North Korea is a growing and direct danger, frankly, to the United States homeland and our allies. The National Defense Strategy notes that North Korea continues to expand its nuclear and missile capability, and Admiral Paparo's statement highlighted a very specific and troubling development in 2024: the launch of a new, larger, solid propellant intercontinental ballistic missile.
Why is the use of solid propellant technology particularly significant from a military planning perspective? What's the big deal there?
Well, it drastically reduces warning time. You see, unlike liquid-fueled missiles, which need hours of preparation and fueling before they can launch.
Right, you can see that activity.
Exactly. Solid propellant missiles can be launched much more rapidly. This cuts down the time available for both intelligence warning and any defensive counteraction. It significantly complicates strategic deterrence and defense planning.
Okay, yeah, that's a big difference. And finally, Iran. While they're primarily focused in the Middle East, their capabilities do affect global planning, right?
They do. Iran is leveraging a large and growing regional missile and unmanned aircraft system capability. That poses a risk to United States forces, allies, and partners across multiple regions.
Right.
The National Defense Strategy notes that Iran is pursuing actions that could improve its ability to produce a nuclear weapon, even as it focuses on building and exporting extensive missile forces and engaging in, malicious cyber and information operations designed to undermine regional stability.
So the strategic estimate has to somehow synthesize all these different challenges: pacing, acute, persistent. How does the estimate ensure planners really get a comprehensive understanding of the entire operating area, making sure no threat or actor is overlooked? The Joint Planning publication provides a specific shell, right, for defining this strategic environment.
Yeah, the strategic estimate shell. It's designed for systematic rigor. It requires planners to understand both their assigned area of responsibility and the broader area of interest.
Okay.
And then it makes them methodically identify and appraise 6 key environmental components. Let's maybe focus on the forces appraisal part of that.
Okay, so we start with adversary forces.
Right. This means identifying all hostile states or groups and providing a really deep appraisal of their objectives, their motivations, and their capabilities. And that appraisal must include any threats they pose to United States power projection activities, like our ability to move troops and equipment into a theater.
Okay. Then second are friendly forces. This seems like where integrated deterrence really starts to take shape on paper.
Correct. This requires identifying assigned United States forces, our regional allies, any anticipated multinational partners, and also those other critical instruments of national power, diplomatic, economic, informational, that have a direct influence on potential operations. This appraisal defines the baseline capability of the coalition, essentially.
Third are neutral forces.
Yep.
Now, in the context of the Indo-Pacific, where so many nations are economically tied to China but might rely on the U.S. for security, assessing neutral forces seems like it must be one of the most critical and, frankly, difficult tasks.
Oh, it's arguably the most politically delicate part of the whole assessment. Planners have to determine the general objectives and motivations of these neutral forces, and they have to anticipate how their actions might impact United States and friendly multinational operations.
Because they could help or hinder.
Exactly. In a contested environment, just losing overflight rights or basing access from a theoretically neutral state could be just as damaging as a hostile action. The strategic estimate must clearly lay out the planning assumptions related to their potential alignment or non-alignment.
Fourth is the civilian environment. This component seems crucial for ensuring planning is responsible and ethical.
It's absolutely vital. This requires identifying factors relating to the civilian population, critical infrastructure, essential services, and systems upon which civilian life depends. The estimate has to provide information essential for a clear understanding of how military operations could affect or, be affected by this environment. The goal is minimal disruption and protecting non-combatants.
Right? And finally, the shell requires analyzing the intrinsic political, military, and economic factors within the environment itself, making sure you get that holistic view, supported by the joint intelligence preparation of the operational environment process.
Commanders and planners have to expect adversaries to be constantly setting conditions for their own advantage. This framework prevents planners from just assuming the environment will be benign or static. It forces them to look for friction points across all domains: political instability, economic interdependence, ongoing military modernization, all of which factor into the operational calculus.
That structured approach, that's what translates as strategic understanding into, well, operational feasibility.
Let's pivot now into the military response itself, how the strategic estimate feeds directly into the planning process.
Okay, so the strategic estimate provides the foundation for the joint planning process. And the Joint Planning Doctrine publication describes this process as assessment-informed and recursive. It's not a simple linear checklist.
Right, it circles back on itself. Exactly. The first crucial step is planning initiation, which involves something called operational design.
Operational design. This sounds like where the commander's real intellectual work begins. It's the moment they really start grappling with the problem itself.
That's a good way to put it. Operational design helps the commander and the staff understand the complex operational environment and clearly define the problem they are actually trying to solve.
Okay.
So defining the problem involves articulating how various operational variables, things like political realities, infrastructure limitations, enemy capabilities, how these can either resist or facilitate the transformation of the current conditions into the desired conditions. It identifies those areas of tension, competition, and contested environments that commanders have to address right away.
And one of the most critical analytical tasks in this entire design process, I'd imagine, is identifying the center of gravity, the true source of power for both ourselves and the enemy.
Absolutely critical. The center of gravity, often called the COG, is the source of power or strength that enables a military force or even an entire nation to achieve its objective.
Okay.
In planning, success requires protecting our own friendly center of gravity while defeating or neutralizing the enemies. But, simply naming the center of gravity isn't enough. The analysis has to be broken down further.
That's where the critical factors analysis comes in, right? You have to break the center of gravity down into 3 essential parts.
Yes, exactly. We use the components detailed in the Joint Planning publication. First, you have critical capabilities. These are the primary abilities that allow the center of gravity to actually function and achieve its objective.
Okay, like an ability.
Right. For instance, if the center of gravity is a nation's logistics system, its critical capability might be the ability to move material effectively across long distances.
Okay. Next are critical requirements.
Critical requirements are the essential conditions, resources, and means that the center of gravity requires to employ that critical capability. So if the capability is long-distance movement, the requirements are things like fuel, trained personnel, secure transport hubs.
Right.
If any of those requirements are significantly degraded, the capability fails.
And the third component, critical vulnerabilities. This is what the joint force is looking to exploit to defeat the enemy, right?
Correct. Critical vulnerabilities are those aspects of the critical requirements that are themselves vulnerable to an attack or action that would significantly degrade that critical requirement.
Okay.
So using our logistics example, if the requirement is secure transport hubs and maybe one critical bridge provides the sole choke point into that hub, well, that bridge is a critical vulnerability. Joint Force commanders seek to create devastating effects on the critical requirements by attacking these specific vulnerabilities. This analysis is really the linchpin of operational planning.
Okay. So once a planning design is established, let's look at the actual force posture required to execute these plans, specifically in the United States Indo-Pacific Command Area of Responsibility. Admiral Paparo's statement emphasizes a forward, credible posture designed to achieve what he calls decision superiority.
Yeah, the command operates a critical layer of forces positioned west of the international dateline. The purpose is to demonstrate what's called advanced all-domain dynamic combat power.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
It means having the immediate, flexible ability to respond to adversarial action across all domains: land, sea, air, space, and cyber. The goal is to gain early leverage over a range of potential scenarios and, as you said, achieve decision superiority. We have to be able to see, understand, decide, and act faster than any adversary.
And achieving that decision superiority, that speed, it must require massive technological investment, specifically in the information systems that enable command and control.
Oh, absolutely. Admiral Paparo specifically highlights the required investments in command, control, computing, communications, cyber intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and targeting, or C5ISRT for short, though we're spelling it out.
Right, C5ISRT.
And also the associated counter command, control, computing, communications, cyber intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and targeting capability, or C5ISRT.
That is definitely helpful. Functionally, what's the real difference between our C5ISRT and the counter C5ISRT capability?
Okay, so C5ISRT is basically our ability to create an information advantage. It's about collecting data through intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and targeting, processing it rapidly using computing and artificial intelligence, and then communicating the command decision effectively through command control and communications, doing all that faster than the adversary.
Got it. So that's our system.
Right. Counter C5ISRT, conversely, is our capability to deny the adversary the ability to do the same thing. It includes things like electronic warfare, cyber defense, counterspace measures, anything designed to blind and confuse the enemy's command and control systems.
Okay.
And the statement really emphasizes leveraging advanced artificial intelligence and machine learning to cut mission planning time dramatically, maybe from days down to hours, which totally transforms the planning cycle.
And this need for speed feeds directly into the need for constant assessment, doesn't it? The Joint Planning publication notes that planning is recursive. It's not just done once and final.
Continuous assessment is absolutely non-negotiable. Commanders have to continually assess their campaign's effect on the operational area and also the operational environment's impact on their campaign.
It goes both ways.
Exactly. This continuous loop is necessary for maintaining the logic and the validity of the operational approach as the situation inevitably evolves and the enemy, of course, adapts.
Okay, shifting slightly now to the role of alliances. We know the United States military can't achieve its strategic objectives alone. The Joint Planning Doctrine publication really stresses that integrated planning is crucial. And it's not just joint staff and Department of Defense agencies, but also interagency partners, multinational partners, even commercial entities.
Yeah, this integration is highly visible in the United States Indo-Pacific Command. Admiral Paparo's statement details specific high-profile multilateral efforts. One key example is the Quad partnership.
Right, the U.S., Japan, Australia, and India.
Exactly. That diplomatic partnership is deepening its focus, and their military cooperation is definitely growing, which is exemplified by the routinization of activities like the major naval exercise, Exercise Malabar.
And that exercise enhances naval interoperability across 4 major regional powers. What about some of the enhanced trilateral efforts mentioned?
Well, the robust trilateral engagement between the United States, Japan, and the Republic of Korea really demonstrates an accelerating shared commitment to regional security. This collaboration includes new, advanced joint training exercises. The statement highlights the new trilateral exercise Freedom Edge, and critically important, sharing real-time North Korea missile warning data to help protect the homelands of all 3 nations.
And all this interoperability, this forward presence, it fundamentally relies on securing access, basing, and overflight, often called ABO, right?
Yes. Securing access, basing, and overflight with alliances and partnerships is explicitly called out in the statement as pivotal to joint force success in any crisis or conflict.
Right.
And the joint planning publication reinforces this by stating that planners absolutely must verify critical planning assumptions like access, basing, and overflight early, very early in the integrated planning process. A well-constructed strategic estimate will clearly articulate the status and potential vulnerabilities of these agreements. Because honestly, without assured access, the most brilliant operational plan just becomes academic. It's unexecutable.
That makes perfect sense. Now, let's consider what happens when deterrence is maybe severely stressed, and we start moving into crisis planning. The Joint Planning publication outlines 2 primary tools that are built into contingency plans specifically for managing this kind of tension: flexible deterrent options and flexible response options.
Right. So flexible deterrent options, or FDOs, these are pre-planned actions. They're calibrated, they're deterrence-oriented, and they're tailored to signal to and influence an adversary's actions before or during a crisis. They're designed to manage escalation.
Okay.
Their core objectives are really to communicate the strength of United States commitments, position forces for future operations if hostilities become unavoidable, but at the same time facilitate early decision-making by leadership and hopefully achieve rapid de-escalation if they're successful.
So FDOs are fundamentally about signaling resolve, setting the stage, maybe showing capability, but without actually firing a shot.
Generally, yes. That's the idea.
What about flexible response options then? How are they different?
Flexible response options, or FROs, they're different. They are generally punitive in nature. Their basic purpose is to preempt or respond to actual attacks against the United States or its interests.
Ah, okay. So these are responses to actions taken.
Yes. Flexible response options provide military options to national leadership that are scalable based on the specific situation. They're focused on hitting the enemy's critical vulnerabilities, and they're designed to achieve decisive action or perhaps set conditions for follow-on operations.
And the Joint Planning publication actually details that these flexible response options are themselves categorized based on the sort of speed and scope of the desired effect.
That's right. They range in intensity. You have rapid response, which focuses on demonstrating resolve through sheer speed of action, perhaps using limited strikes or very high visibility maneuvers.
Okay.
Then there's a limited response, which targets organizations directly attributed to an attack, aiming to maximize perceived legitimacy while keeping the scope restrained.
Right.
And finally, the highest intensity level is a decisive response. Here, the priority shifts to attacking the enemy's operational center of gravity itself, aiming to achieve a long-term disruption of its operational capability. This structured menu prevents national leadership from being forced into a potentially dangerous all-or-nothing scenario.
That level of calibration really speaks to the necessity of meticulous risk management, which brings us neatly to the final element we need to discuss from the strategic estimate process. Inherent in every single decision is risk.
Absolutely. And risk, as defined in the Joint Planning Doctrine publication, is the probability and consequence of an event causing harm to something valued. Military risk is typically divided into 2 main subsets.
Okay, what are those?
Risk to mission, which is the potential inability to achieve current or future objectives, and risk to force, which refers to the negative impacts on the joint force's ability to provide and sustain military resources, people and equipment.
But the real challenge with assessing risk is that it's rarely a precise, quantifiable science, is it? It doesn't just spit out a simple number.
No, absolutely not. The Joint Planning publication explicitly notes there is no definitive formula for quantifying risk. Planners have to provide decision makers an assessment of the expected risks, costs, and benefits. And they have to recognize that different commanders and different national leaders may assess risk or tolerate risk at very different levels.
Right.
This subjective element is why the national military strategy places such emphasis on that concept we mentioned earlier, strategic discipline.
Strategic discipline. Okay, remind us what that is. It sounds like the framework for managing risk across the entire Department of Defense, demanding some ruthless prioritization. How does this concept practically apply to, say, the Indo-Pacific strategy?
Well, strategic discipline requires the joint force to continuously calibrate its effort, focusing laser-like on enduring priorities like the pacing challenge from China in the Indo-Pacific, and consciously accepting measured risk in other areas in the present in order to reduce future risk in that priority theater.
So making calculated trade-offs.
Exactly. For instance, the Department of Defense might accept greater immediate risk in certain non-priority theaters, or perhaps accelerate the retirement of older legacy systems, specifically to redirect resources, funding, and manpower towards the advanced capabilities needed for the Indo-Pacific fight. It's about intentionally transferring risk away from the priority threats to reduce long-term instability where it matters most.
Okay. Managing that risk also depends heavily on continuous high-quality assessment. The Joint Planning Doctrine publication outlines that operational assessments are integral to determining progress toward mission accomplishment.
Yeah, the assessment process serves to answer three core questions for the commander. Where are we now? How did we get here? And what should we do next?
Right.
This process relies heavily on developing specific indicators, which are basically pieces of information that infer the condition, state, or existence of something to measure progress towards the desired end state.
And those indicators are then used to derive two crucial types of measures of performance and measures of effectiveness. This distinction, I find, is often where planning can get a bit confusing for people.
It is, but it's probably the most critical distinction in assessment. Measures of performance, or MOPs, are used to answer the question, are we doing things right? They measure task accomplishment.
Okay, task accomplished.
Right. For example, a measure of performance might be, did the Naval Task Force arrive at its designated patrol zone on time and complete all its planned maneuvers? Did we do the task?
So MOPs are about execution, timeliness, doing the thing we said we'd do. What about measures of effectiveness then?
Measures of effectiveness, or MOEs, are used to answer the question, are we doing the right things to create the desired changes in the conditions of the operational environment? This is about the outcome, not just the output.
The effect.
Exactly. Using the same example, the measure of effectiveness is, did the presence of that task force, arriving on time and doing its maneuvers, actually change the adversary's decision calculus about their own movements in that contested zone? Effectiveness is about achieving the desired outcome, not just checking the box on completing a task.
And to maintain analytical rigor here and prevent commanders from being maybe misled by faulty data, the Joint Planning publication demands a pretty rigorous scrutiny of the data that underpins these assessments.
Oh, absolutely. Assessors have to categorize information. Is it quantitative or qualitative? Is it subjective or objective?
Example.
Well, quantitative objective data might be the precise number of ship patrol hours logged per week, hard numbers. Qualitative subjective data might come from something like local population surveys about their perception of security or how effective they think multinational patrols are. Assessors have to scrutinize and validate all data sources, which could include friendly force observations, reports from international organizations, media reports, anything to ensure credibility and transparency in the assessment.
And finally, the Joint Planning publication looks ahead a bit, noting that the rapidly changing operational environment demands adaptation and, importantly, investment in the human element.
Yeah, the future operating environment demands a very proactive approach, where joint force commanders leverage emerging technologies, we mentioned, advanced artificial intelligence and machine learning, to process massive volumes of data and drastically shorten those decision cycles. However,
There's a but.
The crucial component still remains the human capital.
It goes beyond just having the best technology then. We're talking about developing the actual intellectual capacity of the planning staff itself.
Exactly. Developing human capital to know how to think, as opposed to merely being trained on what to do, is increasingly vital. It's essential to shape future strategy and adapt to the evolving character of war. Technology will accelerate analysis, for sure, but it's the critical thinking, the judgment, the creativity of the human planner that truly defines the problem, designs the operational solution, and ultimately writes that effective strategic estimate.
That brings us toward the close of this deep dive. We've really seen how the strategic estimate serves as this crucial link, doesn't it? Translating high-level national policy, which flows down from the national security strategy and the national defense strategy, into actual actionable military plans. It forces planners to systematically analyze incredibly complex threats, from the pacing challenge posed by the People's Republic of China to the acute threat of Russia, all while navigating the nuances of things like integrated deterrence, campaigning, and managing both quantifiable and qualitative risks.
It really is an exercise in unifying a massive, complicated system toward a single purpose, or a set of aligned purposes. The strategic estimate ensures that every part of the joint force understands the ends, the ways, and the means. And it underscores that critical need for constant assessment and discipline in resource application, especially in a dynamic and contested theater like the Indo-Pacific.
This whole discussion reminds me of an observation noted in the Joint Planning publication, apparently from way back in 1942, by then Brigadier General Dwight D. Eisenhower. He famously said, "The struggle to secure the adoption by all concerned of a common concept of strategical objectives is wearing me down."
Ah, yeah. That quote perfectly captures the enduring challenge, doesn't it? Despite all the incredible technological advances we have now, all the detailed doctrine, all the analytic tools we've talked about today, achieving that unified action, that shared strategic vision across the entire joint planning and execution community, from the combatant commander all the way down to the most junior planner, that still remains the greatest enduring challenge.
So for you listening, perhaps the final thought to carry forward from our discussion is this. Considering the sheer pace of change and the complexity of these nested strategies we've outlined, how do you achieve that strategic discipline and that vital shared strategic vision within your own area of responsibility, especially when the conditions and the risks you have to accept are changing almost daily? Think about how your own planning helps achieve that common concept of strategical objectives, something to mull over until our next deep dive.